influencers who filmed their own deaths. That's what I'll be covering today, and honestly, researching these stories completely changed the way I look at online content. From a woman streaming a cozy evening when her chat suddenly begged her to run, to an influencer whose camera recorded him instantly vanishing into his family's bin, making it one of the most haunting recordings I've ever seen. It was January 9th, 2017, and a cold snap had settled over the mountains of southwestern Montana, pushing overnight temperatures into the low teens and coating the pine canopy in a thin shell of frost. A single converted cargo van sat at the end of a Forest Service road in a dispersed campsite, its windows fogged from the inside, a faint orange glow visible through a curtain gap. Sunniva Eidhammer was 29 years old and had spent the previous 18 months living full-time in a cargo van she'd converted herself using online tutorials and forum advice. Before that, she'd worked as a dental hygienist in Bozeman, leaving after what she later described on her channel as burnout. Her van life content had built a small but loyal following, viewers who tuned in for her calm, unpolished broadcasts of campsite cooking, mountain sunsets, and life on the road. Honestly, that type of content is something I would definitely watch. She earned a modest income through affiliate links and small sponsorships from outdoor gear companies. From what I was able to gather, friends and family described her as stubbornly self-reliant, someone who treated any suggestion of outside help as a challenge to her competence. She had installed the van's propane heater herself, following a forum thread rather than hiring a certified technician. When her mother suggested she have the system inspected before winter, Sunniva reportedly dismissed the idea. From the investigation report I went through while researching this, there was no record of any professional ever looking at that heater. She signed off every live stream by holding up her gray tabby cat, Fisk, to the camera and saying goodnight in Norwegian, a nod to her immigrant parents that followers had turned into a recurring meme. That detail sits heavy with me. That evening, she went live around 8 o'clock. Roughly 340 viewers joined, her typical weeknight number. The propane heater was running visibly in the background. She began cooking a one-pot meal on a small camp stove, chatting with the comment feed. And I'm warning you now, I'll need you to brace yourself for what comes next, because this is one of the hardest sequences I've had to sit through putting this video together. Approximately 25 minutes in, her speech began to slow. She repeated a sentence she'd already finished, paused, then laughed it off as being tired. A few minutes later, she lost a thought mid-word and stared silently at the camera for several seconds before resuming an unrelated topic. Viewers began commenting, asking if she was all right, whether the heater was vented, several specifically mentioning carbon monoxide. She didn't acknowledge them, and that right there is what carbon monoxide does. It takes away your ability to recognize that something is wrong, even when hundreds of people are screaming it at you. She knocked over a spice jar and didn't react, then rested her forehead against her palm for a long pause. Chat accelerated. Users typed warnings in capital letters. Some posted emergency numbers. One viewer later told investigators she began searching Sunniva's previous posts to determine her approximate location. Just imagining being in that viewer position shakes me to my core. Sunniva attempted to stand, swayed sharply, and sat back down on the bed platform. Her words were slurred and disconnected. She slumped sideways against the van wall, eyes half open, arms limp. The chat was in full panic, new viewers flooding in as word spread. Several people independently attempted to contact Montana Emergency Services, but had no address to provide. Sunniva stopped moving. The stream continued for another 47 minutes, showing the van interior, the heater still running, and the cat sitting near her feet, before the platform cut the feed after mass reporting by viewers. 47 minutes. I keep coming back to that number. A viewer who had cross-referenced her recent location posts with Forest Service road maps contacted the county sheriff's office. Search teams located the van the following morning. Sunniva was found deceased inside. The cat was found alive but in critical condition near the door seam, where the foam seal had partially separated, allowing minimal air exchange at floor level. Based on the official reports, I found the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be acute carbon monoxide poisoning, with carboxyhemoglobin levels indicating sustained lethal exposure. The heater's exhaust had been improperly routed, and the foam weather stripping eliminated the van's remaining ventilation. No CO detector was found. Her family advocated publicly for detector requirements in converted vehicle dwellings. The streaming platform implemented a pilot program for health emergency detection during live streams. Her mother adopted the cat. This next story is the one that haunted me the most while I was putting this video together. It takes place on a family farm in Nebraska, and the camera he set up to film his own content is the reason we know exactly what happened. It was October 3rd, 2015. Harvest dust hung in the still air above a row of steel grain bins behind a white clapboard farmhouse in central Nebraska, and the late afternoon light turned everything. The dirt track, the equipment lot, the stubble field stretching to the horizon, the same shade of bronze. Marlo Terhune was 31 years old and operated a mid-sized family grain farm that had been in continuous operation since the 1920s. He grew corn and soybeans across several hundred acres with his wife, who managed the business side. They had a young daughter. Alongside farming, Marlo had built a following as an agricultural lifestyle content creator, documenting equipment breakdowns, harvest logistics, early mornings, and the monotony between them. From everything I watched, his videos had a signature quality. He narrated everything in a half-whispered voice, slow and deadpan, as if a 50,000 bushel grain bin were a wildlife habitat and he were David Attenborough observing it from a blind. Viewers said it made industrial agriculture feel oddly intimate. New subscribers mentioned it first. I watched a few of his old videos while I was researching this. You'd never guess you were looking at someone in danger. Marlo had been in and out of grain bins since he was old enough to follow his father up the exterior ladder. He knew the safety protocols: harness, spotter, lockout on the auger, because his father had drilled them in. But decades of routine had worn the caution away. And for me, that's the scariest kinds of risk, the ones you stop noticing. He entered bins alone regularly. His wife later told investigators she didn't know he'd gone in that afternoon. He wanted an interior overhead shot for a harvest video, looking down at the grain surface from the top of a partially filled bin. He'd mounted a small action camera on the interior wall near the top hatch to capture the angle. The bin was partially filled, the grain level sitting roughly 10 feet below the upper access point. The surface appeared flat and solid. Marlo descended the bin's interior ladder and stepped off onto the grain. The camera, mounted above and behind him, began recording. He moved slowly toward the center, narrating in his signature whisper, describing the harvest yield, the grain quality, how this particular bin had been in service since his grandfather poured the foundation. I want you to picture that for a second, standing in the same bin your grandfather built, talking to a camera, completely at ease. His right foot broke through on the 5th step. He dropped to his knee instantly, and this is where I had to put my phone down for a minute. The grain surface, which had crusted from moisture but remained loose beneath, began funneling around his body, a void below the crust pulling material inward the moment his weight fractured the seal. He scrambled backward. Each movement broke more of the surface. Grain poured into the gap his body created, pulling him deeper with visible speed. He was waist deep within seconds. His arms pushed against the surface, but the grain flowed around his hands like heavy liquid, offering no purchase. His movements became more urgent, hands slapping the crust ahead of him, breaking it, feeding more grain into the funnel. The camera captured him from above, chest deep, then shoulders, his arms still moving but slower now. His breathing audibly labored on the audio track. Every exhalation let the grain settle tighter around his ribs. He could not expand his chest to inhale fully. His head dropped below the surface. The camera showed only settling grain and silence, and that footage still lives rent-free in my head as I'm writing this. His wife found the hatch open when he didn't return for dinner and called emergency services. Crews arrived within 30 minutes and cut panels from the bin wall to relieve pressure. Marlo was recovered 4 feet below the surface, unresponsive, and pronounced dead at the scene. The medical reports I found determined the official cause of death to be compressive asphyxia and suffocation due to grain engulfment. Investigators confirmed the surface had bridged, a crusted layer over loose grain beneath, a well-documented hazard that appears identical to solid ground. The camera was recovered with full footage intact. His family later allowed the footage to be used for safety awareness, helping reinforce proper grain bin entry protocols. Okay, so this next one made me genuinely upset. 20-year-old streaming from a beach with his friends, and what kills him is something you'd never think twice about. It was August 17th, 2018. A wide stretch of beach along the Massachusetts coast lay under overcast skies, the sand still dark and heavy from a rainstorm that had passed through overnight. Behind the beach, a line of dunes rose steeply, 10 to 12 feet of packed, wind-sculpted sand running parallel to the waterline. Lysander Ouellet was 20 years old and a college sophomore studying communications. He ran a small but growing live stream channel built around dares, challenges, and reaction content. His following was modest, a few thousand regular viewers, but the engagement was intense. His audience didn't just watch, they directed. That distinction matters a lot, and I think you'll see why. He had a signature format. He'd read a dare from chat, stare into the camera for exactly 3 seconds without blinking, then accept it with a 2-word response his audience had turned into a catchphrase. The 3-second pause was the bit, his most clipped moment, and the reason his chat pushed harder every stream. I watched a bunch of his old clips while putting this together. The kid had real timing. You could see why people kept coming back. His roommate later told a reporter that Lysander kept a whiteboard in his bedroom tracking his subscriber count, checked before and after every upload, sometimes twice. 20 years old, I want you to keep that in mind. He was streaming that afternoon from the beach with 2 friends. The content was loose, no plan, just reading chat. He'd brought a collapsible shovel for a sandcastle bit. Chat had other ideas. Suggestions escalated. Dig a hole, dig deeper, dig a tunnel into the dune. Lysander read the dare aloud, paused 3 seconds, and accepted it. And I swear, when I read that, my stomach dropped. He started digging horizontally into the dune face at ground level, carving out a cavity roughly 3 feet wide. His friend had propped a phone on a cooler about 8 feet away, still streaming. Lysander was 4 feet deep into the dune, his upper body inside the cavity, only his legs visible, when his friend standing nearby noticed the sand above the opening sag downward. He told Lysander to get out. Lysander backed partially out, his torso now visible, and looked up at the overhang above him. The collapse was sudden. A slab of wet, compacted sand roughly 6 feet wide dropped vertically, burying him from the chest down in a single movement. Additional sand flowed in immediately after, settling around his neck. His friends dropped to their knees and began digging with their hands and the shovel. This part was the hardest for me to research, because they did everything right, and it didn't matter. Wet sand is extraordinarily heavy. Each handful they removed was replaced by more settling from above. Other beachgoers ran over, 5, then 8 people clawing at compacted sand around a 20-year-old whose breathing was growing audibly shallow. His chest could not expand against the weight. He responded to his friends' voices at first, short words, strained, then stopped. His eyes closed. The phone on the cooler recorded everything. I haven't been able to shake that recording out of my head. Emergency services arrived roughly 20 minutes after a beachgoer called. Rescue crews used specialized tools to remove the compacted sand. Lysander was extracted approximately 40 minutes after the initial collapse and pronounced dead at the scene. According to the official reports I found, the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be compressive asphyxia. Saturated sand on his chest and abdomen prevented respiratory function. Investigators noted wet sand weighs roughly 130 pounds per cubic foot and behaves unpredictably when undercut. The beach authority installed permanent signage prohibiting dune excavation. His university held a memorial. His roommate told a reporter the whiteboard was still on the wall when he moved out. Okay, this next story takes place in a 1-bedroom apartment in South Korea. No wilderness, no heights, no adventure. Just a man alone in front of a camera and an audience that could see exactly what was happening but couldn't physically do a thing about it. It was November 6, 2016. A ring light illuminated a small table covered in food containers inside a 1-bedroom apartment in a residential high-rise in Incheon, South Korea. The rest of the room was dim. A bed visible in the background, a clothing rack, blinds drawn, the camera framed tight on the table and the man behind it. Gyubin Baek was 26 years old and had spent the past 3 years as a full-time Mukbang streamer. broadcasting himself eating large quantities of food to a live audience 5 nights a week from that apartment. He earned his income entirely through viewer donations and sponsorship deals with food delivery services. Friday night streams regularly drew roughly 4,000 concurrent viewers. His mother, who lived 40 minutes away by transit, visited weekly to help clean. She later told investigators she worried about the isolation, the hours alone, the eating, the routine that never seemed to change. When I read that quote from his mother, I had to step away from my desk for a minute. So based on what I could find, Gubin had a signature move his audience had turned into a meme. Mid-bite, he'd pause, look directly at the camera with exaggerated wide eyes, and give a slow, deliberate thumbs up. Fans screenshotted it constantly. It had become his most recognizable image. He was competitive and stubborn about challenges, refusing to slow down during timed eating segments because viewer donations spiked dramatically during the final minutes. He'd pushed through visible discomfort in previous streams, and his audience had come to expect it. And I think that expectation is exactly what made this so dangerous, because when something actually goes wrong, everyone assumes it's part of the show. That Friday evening, he went live at 9 o'clock with roughly 4,200 viewers. The challenge was timed. A large quantity of tteokbokki, dense, chewy cylindrical rice cakes in thick sauce, a staple of Korean mukbang content. He was trying to beat his own previous record. Donations began immediately as the timer started. I need you to remember that detail, the donations, because it matters later. The first 15 minutes were routine, steady eating, narration between bites, the thumbs up to cheers in chat. Then he increased the pace, larger bites, less chewing, a faster rhythm. Donation amounts climbed. Approximately 22 minutes in, he paused abruptly. His jaw stopped mid-chew. His hand moved to his throat. He attempted to swallow, neck extended, head tilted back. Nothing moved. He tried again. His expression shifted from effort to something rigid. He pushed back and stood. The chair fell behind him. He leaned forward, mouth open, attempting to cough. No sound of air. He struck his chest with an open palm, then harder. His face reddened under the ring light. His eyes were wide, not the performative wide eyes of the thumbs up, but locked open and unblinking. And believe me, this recording was haunting to watch. Chat flooded. Spit it out, drink water, call help. He pressed his abdomen against the table edge, but the table slid across the floor. He dropped to his knees. His movements became uncoordinated. He reached toward the camera, then his arm dropped. He collapsed sideways, partially visible in the frame. The seated camera angle captured only his torso and one still hand. His movement ceased within 2 minutes of the obstruction. The stream continued. Ring light, food, overturned chair, his motionless form at the edge of the frame. And I just want you to take a moment to process how heartbreaking that is. Viewers contacted Korean emergency services, but could provide his username, not his physical address. Dispatchers coordinated with the platform to trace his account, a process that created significant delay. Responders arrived roughly 35 minutes after the obstruction. The building manager unlocked the door. Gubin was pronounced dead on arrival at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner determined asphyxiation from complete airway obstruction. A dense bolus of rice cake had sealed the oropharynx. The platform implemented voluntary guidelines recommending solo streamers register a dispatchable address. His mother asked that the stream not be shared. A community fundraiser raised funds for his family, and his channel was archived at her request. This last story is the one I saved for the end, and it's for a reason. There's no audience watching, no live stream, no chat, just a man, his drone, and a cliff edge in Norway. And the thing that makes this one so haunting is what the camera captured after he was already gone. It was September 22nd, 2019. Pale granite stretched along the edge of a fjord in northern Norway, dropping several hundred feet to dark water below. No fencing lined the cliff edge, no signage marked the drop. Sparse vegetation clung to cracks in the rock, and low autumn sunlight cast long shadows across the open terrain, making depth and distance difficult to judge. Tavo Korhonen was 41 years old, a licensed land surveyor in Finnish Lapland who had built a side career as a landscape drone photographer, selling prints and licensing aerial footage to tourism boards across Scandinavia. His following was modest. Photography enthusiasts and drone operators who appreciated his precision and remote locations. Divorced with 2 children, colleagues described him as deeply focused. someone who could spend 3 hours adjusting a single angle without speaking. One later told investigators he'd once walked into a parked excavator while checking GPS readings. That detail told me everything I needed to know about this man before I even got to what happened. He wore the same battered orange beanie in every video, his late father's fishing hat from decades on trawlers in the Gulf of Bothnia. Followers worldwide mailed him orange beanies. He kept them in a box by his front door, but never wore any on camera, only the original. I sat with that for a while when I found it in my research. A regional tourism board had contracted him for aerial footage of the fjord coastline. The shot required him to walk along the cliff top while piloting the drone, maintaining legal line of sight with the aircraft while monitoring shot framing on the handheld controller screen. Both tasks required his attention directed outward and downward, away from his footing. He was working alone. The tourism board had not arranged a safety observer, and personally, I think that's something that should have never been optional for a job like this. He had scouted the location the previous day. He arrived early that morning, parked his rental vehicle at a gravel pullout roughly 1.5 miles from the cliff section, and hiked in with his equipment. No other people were present. No spotter, no fencing, no other hikers. Just him and a screen. I need you to hold on to that. Tavo launched the drone from a flat area roughly 30 feet from the cliff edge. The drone's onboard memory card, recovered later from the aircraft, recorded the full sequence. He completed one pass successfully, walking roughly 200 feet along the cliff edge and back, eyes shifting between the controller screen and his footing. The footage intermittently captured him from the side, the orange beanie visible against gray rock, his gait steady, his path a consistent 3 to 4 feet from the edge. When I watched this part of the reconstruction, everything still looks fine. He's focused, he's steady, and that's what makes the next few seconds so hard. He began a second pass, adjusting the drone to a lower altitude for a tighter angle on the cliff face. The adjustment required more precise input on the controller. His attention shifted almost entirely to the screen. This is the moment I kept rewinding to in my head. On the drone footage, his walking path drifted gradually closer to the edge. His feet moved within 2 feet. He did not appear to look down. His left foot stepped onto a section where the rock edge was fractured and slightly undercut, visually indistinguishable from solid ground. The edge gave way. On the footage, he dropped from frame in a single step, one moment walking, the next, empty rock and a small cloud of dust where he had stood. The drone, receiving no further controller input, continued its programmed path for several seconds before activating its automatic return to home function. As it ascended and rotated toward the launch point, the wide-angle lens swept across the cliff edge, the fracture point visible, the disturbed rock, and far below, a motionless shape on the rocks at the waterline. The drone landed at its launch point and powered down after the battery timeout. It sat on the grass beside his equipment bag for the rest of the day. That image, the drone just sitting there in the grass, waiting for someone who's never coming back, is one I think will forever stay with me even as I keep covering more stories like this. When Tavo didn't return his rental vehicle that evening, the agency contacted local authorities. A search team reached the fjord the following morning and found his equipment, the drone, and his vehicle at the pullout. His body was recovered from the cliff base by a Coast Guard team, approximately 300 feet below on rock at the waterline. The medical examiner determined massive blunt force trauma, including catastrophic cranial injuries. Death was instantaneous, and if there's any small mercy in this story, I think it's that. The drone's memory card provided full reconstruction. Guidelines were later introduced requiring tethers or spotters for commercial operators working near cliff edges. His ex-wife later told a journalist their daughter wore the original orange beanie to his memorial. The box from followers was still by the front door.